My colleagues, that's Thulasizwe Simelane, fellow anchor, and senior reporters Pamandla Goke are in Braamfontein in Johannesburg, where the hearings are taking place. They've been inside the chambers listening to the evidence of the president. Let's speak to Thulasizwe Simelane at this hour on the Midday View. Makuchwa, good afternoon. Thank you very much for your time. You've been inside there listening attentively to what is happening. You've been observing from early hours of the morning, as well as the delegation that's accompanying Matamela Cyril Ramaphosa is the ANC president to testify there. From where I'm sitting, the optics are looking good. The PR side is looking good. How he's coming across in his opening statement is looking good. But things have not yet got heated. I wonder if they will. I don't know, what's your sense at this early stage of his testimony?
I agree with you, Dan, in that we don't know whether things will get heated or not. And it's important, earlier on I was talking about the tone and style of the evidence leader. Advocate Paul Pretorius is not known for, getting really intense and getting matters heated up. Certainly not from his side. He has found himself in the past in a situation where things did get heated with certain witnesses, a number of witnesses that we have seen. Certainly, if you talk about former President Jacob Zuma and his legal team, then they had a lot to say about the style and tone of Advocate Paul Pretorius. But he's not known for, cornering witnesses as such at this commission, at least. And that's partly because this is an inquisitorial process as opposed to an adversarial process. And of course, Cyril Ramaphosa comes here not as an implicated person in the technical sense of that phrase here at the Commission. He comes here representing the African National Congress. So if anyone is looking for sparks to fly, I don't know if the hearing itself will live up to that kind of expectation. It certainly hasn't from the early aspects where the focus has been on the deployment policy of the ANC, how the ANC chooses whom to deploy to strategic positions within the state. That's really what he's been explaining in the earlier part. It is, I guess, process dense and policy dense in the first part, in that he's been explaining once the ANC has the mandate from the electorate, it then wants to position certain people in strategic locations of power for it to pursue its policies and fulfill its objectives in government. And at that point, that's where the deployment policy becomes relevant, as well as the deployment committee becomes relevant in ensuring that the right people who are quote-unquote fit for purpose, are deployed in those strategic locations of power. And we can talk about how he has readily admitted that in some instances that doesn't always go right. I mean, you think about, for instance, Braden, just yesterday, Mosebenzi Zwane was explaining processes around how he employed those he called his advisors. And there were many questions about the caliber of the people that he employed as advisors. The chairperson, Raymond Zondo, asking him, what qualifications did you know these two people to have that were your general advisors on many, many matters? And he couldn't explain what qualifications they had, what made them stand out as opposed to other people. In fact, he was saying that one of them was well-versed in ANC matters, but he couldn't tell whether the person was actually an ANC member at all. The other, he said, was someone who was well-versed in the law, but couldn't confirm whether this person had a legal qualification or not. And I guess that really segues nicely into this conversation that Cyril Ramaphosa has been talking about this morning into this afternoon, the role of ministers in making recommendations to the deployment committee, because he says in many instances it's ministers who come to the deployment committee and say, I've narrowed it down to a few people, but I'd like this person to be appointed. So I'd like your buy-in into appointing this person to a strategic position within government.
Yeah, he's addressed a number of issues. That one has been questioned currently. The focus is on the cadre deployment. But Thulasizwe, the president, has also been speaking about other matters, including saying that Fikile Mbalula raised issues of state capture in 2011 already. But he says the party's National Executive Committee did not act on this at the time.
In my submission, I outline how allegations of state capture arose within the structures of the ANC and how the organization responded at different moments. Without going into detail in this opening statement, it is worth mentioning that one of the earliest claims made within ANC structures of the possibility that members of the Gupta family may have had an improper role in the functioning of the executive was a statement by Minister Fikile Mbalula at an ANC meeting in 2011. To my knowledge, the matter was not taken further by the NEC or in any structure of the organization after he had mentioned it. At the time, the statement did not prompt any specific concerns about the capture of the state. With the passage of time, more reports began to surface in the public domain about the alleged capture of public enterprises by private interests and the undue influence of certain individuals, notably members of the Gupta family, in executive decisions and appointments.
Well, as Thulasizwe was saying there a short while ago, the ANC president says the party's deployment committee makes the final recommendations on who should be placed in a particular position within state organs like state-owned enterprises. But he's told the state capture inquiry that this is based on recommendations from cabinet ministers, as well as the experience of applicants. The deployment committee is chaired by the ANC's deputy president, Didi Mabuza.
Quite often, ministers come to the deployment committee having gone through a process, a pre-selection process themselves, and their various either officials or committees embedded in their own ministry, where they sift through a number of, say, possible names. And when they come, they seek to convince the deployment committee about certain candidates who may be shortlisted. So in the end, quite often, it's not even at the instance of the deployment committee. It is at the instance of the minister, who knows and should know the skills, the experience that are fit for purpose for the task that they manage or they run in the ministry. So they would know, for instance, CEO of an entity, what the requirements are. So and the deployment committee does not know in full. So they come to the deployment committee and seek to convince the deployment committee and even put up a pitted, not fight, but argumentation of why the persons that they may want to see appointed should be recommended by the deployment committee. So that is the practical experience that I've had. So the deployment committee, in the end, it will tell people that apply, there are these positions, but it is the deployee in that ministry or in that who manages that state-owned enterprise who would know in greater detail and finer detail precisely what is required. So they seek to convince the deployment committee.
That's President of the ANC there, Matamela Cyril Ramaphosa. Thulasizwe, of course, in about half an hour or so from now, he'll be back on the stand giving more testimony after lunch. But he was afforded that first part to make an opening statement. We've been playing bites from that as well since that time. I mean, a number of things he said, as you said, acknowledging a couple of things. But when listening to him, there was anything that was surprising to you besides the fact that he just acknowledged from the beginning that, you know, this state capture thing and has put the ANC into trouble, really?
So, Praden, for me, one of the most remarkable comments from that opening statement was the statement where President Cyril Ramaphosa of the ANC said that in addition to just, you know, concerns about the direction of the ANC and its own policies and practices around issues of corruption, the other factors that weigh in on whether or not people are able to make themselves heard on issues of corruption and even act on issues of corruption is, quote unquote, the balance of power. I'm one of those people who consistently, you know, make comments about considerations of a balance of forces weighing in on matters of national importance, where actually the consideration should be, is there corruption or not? Let's act on it. But to hear the leader of the ANC acknowledging it in that way, to say, you know, the alignment of views, balance of power comes into play is quite extraordinary for him to have said that. And also talking about the power and control to make appointments as well as dispense patronage, weighing in as a factor in terms of how and the extent to which people are able to act on issues of corruption. That, for me, was a remarkable comment. It is similar to what I think it was Balegambete, and if it isn't, she will forgive me, because we did hear a few of the current and former leaders of Parliament also weighing in on that whole aspect of the legislature and members of Parliament holding the executive to account, where I think it's Balegambete who said some of these MPs are so insecure in terms of tenure, in terms of the party lists, such that, you know, rather than raise issues sharply, they would rather retreat, you know, and really not want to be seen to be raising those issues sharply. That is partly what Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo is exploring, to say, when all of these matters that are now under review at this commission were happening, where were the people who hold the mandate electorally? Where was the ANC? You know, why didn't they say something earlier? Why didn't people who were in the corridors and hallways of power, why didn't they say anything earlier? People such as Cyril Ramaphosa. So to hear that being acknowledged as honestly as I heard there was quite remarkable for me. And of course, there was that admission once again that mistakes were made. Mistakes were made, and the role of power, of money in politics within the ANC, but also within the contestation between political parties, just the murky waters of political party funding by people in some instances who are expecting patronage, who are expecting to be beneficiaries from state contracts, as well as the funding inside the ANC. I do get a feeling that we will be going a bit deeper into that particular aspect of political party funding, as well as intra-party campaign funding.
I'm glad you mentioned the issue of funding, Thulasizwe, because at this moment we can remind our viewers about what Ramaphosa said in terms of that very matter, saying that ANC's policies on the funding of internal leadership battles are problematic. Ramaphosa quoted controversy, of course, in the fundraising campaign for his 2017 party presidential race, otherwise known as the CR17 campaign.
We believe that the Political Funding Act will have a far-reaching implication for the integrity and transparency of our political system, and will help to rebuild public trust in the political process. While the Political Party Funding Act deals with donations to political parties, the ANC has also identified weaknesses in its approach to the funding of internal party contests. that is leadership contest. Specifically, it has noted that its guidelines on the conduct of internal leadership elections are not suited for the conditions of the time that we live in, and has initiated a process to review its policies on this matter. The issue forms part of the discussion documents published last year in preparation for the ANC's upcoming National General Council. And raising this issue during the NEC meeting of 26 July 1919, I said, as President, open quotes, in the absence of clear, appropriate and realistic guidelines, our leadership contests will continue to play themselves out in the shadows, in conditions of secrecy and mistrust, encouraging patronage and factionalism, close quote.
There you have it, Thulasizwe, the President there earlier explaining about that internal party funding thing and welcoming the new Political Party Funding Act, and hopefully that might resolve the way forward. He's speaking very freely, it seems. It's like it's very well prepared. And I was just wondering earlier, Thulasizwe, and I need to ask you this, because you've covered many ANC political events and party functions. The kind of delegation he's got with him at the state capture inquiry today, what does it mean? How should we interpret it just watching it? What's your sense?
It is quite a significant delegation that he's got with him, Braden. It is not unusual that when an ANC leader comes here, there'll be one or two members of the National Executive Committee who do come through to be part of the hearings and to sort of give the ANC's take on events as they unfold. So there's nothing unusual about that. The ANC spokesperson, Pulemabe, does make a point that especially when one of the national officials, be it the national chairperson or someone like that, of that caliber, is appearing, he would be here. But interestingly, a few months ago, in fact over a year ago, when former President Jacob Zuma appeared for the first time at the commission, you had that interesting dynamic where you had the official party spokesperson coming through, and then you had someone like a Zizigotwa, also in a way that was sort of unofficial, but you sort of got a sense that he's also got an interest in this. And Sibongile Pesani, the head of the ANC presidency, you can read into that all you want, but we do see these delegations do come through. In fact, let me take that point and throw it at Siphamandla Goke. Siphamandla, it may be that my recollection, of course, around Zizigotwa, the commission was still sitting at the old, at its previous venue when former President Jacob Zuma appeared. I think it was 2019. You had the official spokesperson of the ANC in Pulemabe. Then you had someone that could be approached by journalists for comment and was ready and willing to comment in Zizigotwa. And of course, we were still very close to the NASREC conference at that particular point, and there were those dynamics. But it could be argued that the dynamics have hardly shifted. Tell me what you make of the delegation that President Cyril Ramaphosa of the ANC has come with today.
That delegation, I asked the national chairperson of the ANC, Gwede Mantashe, about the composition of the delegation. He said to me, Pamandla, we are here to work, we are serious. This composition tells you that we are united. But there will be questions there to say, if you are united, where is the Secretary General of the ANC? He is not here, he is busy with other activities. We know that the Deputy President of the ANC and the Deputy President of the country is said to be embarking on an important state business. So that one can be explained as to why he is not here. But you look at the composition there. Some people will say these are political allies of the president of the ANC, but others will say not at all, because some of the people are those who wanted to contest him in Nazareth. For instance, they would argue that the composition of this delegation is very important if you analyze it carefully, because you have the Treasurer General of the ANC here, Paul Mashatile. He has an interest in this matter. Remember, some of the accusations and allegations is that the ANC benefited in terms of some money which was channeled or donated connected to the ANC through state capture, and you've got the national chairperson who has taken a stand here and testified. Jesse Duarte is also here, the Deputy Secretary General, who has made some what many people will call controversial remarks during that meeting with former President Jacob Zuma about this commission taking a prosecutorial approach and stance. So the composition of the delegation is very important, but those are senior NEC members of the ANC, including the head of policy, Jeff Radebe.
Yes, of course, Jeff Radebe is right in the middle of processes to prepare ANC branches to resume the political life of the ANC, that NGC National General Council, which is like a halfway, a midway review of policy implementation, also scheduled to happen in one form or another at some point. He's been busy with that kind of work. And some of the matters that are coming up in Cyril Ramaphosa's testimony, at least at this stage, Siphamandla, are also issues of policy, right? That whole issue of what stood out for me, for example, was him saying, yes, the Political Party Funding Act deals with the bigger issue of funding of political parties, but we've already raised it in our discussion documents to say the loophole remains in as far as intra-party contestation for leadership. If you are a Jeff Radebe and you're preparing branches, you are very much interested in how this discussion goes.
Indeed, simply because coming from Nazareth, you know how the issue of funding of internal campaigns within the ANC as a whole, and you have correctly pointed out that moving forward, Jeff Radebe and others would need to be seized with that important task of how the party deals with this policy issue moving forward, because it's not an easy issue to deal with. But also Jeff Radebe, even though he is not in government now as we speak, but he is one of the longest serving ministers, former ministers. I mean, since 1994, he has been there. He knows governance, and also when it comes to the ANC, if I'm not mistaken, he's one of the longest serving head of policies in the party, if I'm not mistaken. So it's not surprising that he would be here, because whatever is said in this commission, he will have to go back and look at the guidelines in preparation for the upcoming policy conference and the NGC. But also, moving forward, he would need to appraise himself with any evidence and testimony that comes out of this session by ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa, because moving forward, he will be dealing with structures of the ANC in trying to shape up that policy when it comes to internal contestation and the issue of funding that decision.
So that's how it's looking. Okay, watching developments from inside the old Johannesburg Council chamber where this commission is taking place. Also highlighting, of course, that delegation and who is not part of the delegation, Siphamandla, telling us that the deputy president of the ANC is said to be busy with state business. But I would also add that let's not forget that the general secretary, the secretary general of the ANC actually has a lot on his plate at the moment, given that tomorrow is the 29th of April, really the last day for people in his position who have been charged with issues of corruption to either step aside or face whatever consequences will come after that, which do include, at the very least, the possibility of suspension. Whether or not it is that easy, we will see in the coming days and weeks.
Thank you very much. Thulasizwe Simelane and Siphamandla Goke there in Braamfontein. We've got about 15 minutes or so to go before the resumption of the testimony of the ANC President Matamela Cyril Ramaphosa. Well, shortly we'll also be taking you to OR Tambo Airport for the latest on the Mango Airline situation.